Okay, Charles, can you weigh in on that? Because one of the things that I see here is that people are getting their back up against the wall here. They're sick and tired of being treated like they are in Western media because it is. Go ahead, jump in.
The West is just totally, again, misjudging and underestimating Russia and the situation that they're in. And again, it's happening because they're not getting the facts from their own media. Russia's attitude is, look, we hold all the cards. We're in a strong position. This economic crisis doesn't scare us. We've got the future ahead of us. You guys are in big trouble. You're in big trouble in Ukraine, and we're going to play the long game. And and then the West is saying, oh, Russia's about to fold. They're about to crumble. They're terrified of their economic crisis. I mean, it's like two ships passing in the night. Like, they don't understand each other. And it's. I just want to very quickly ask my co-guests here, where do you get your news about Russia from? I mean, if you want to read in the morning what's happened in Russia yesterday, what sources do you turn to? Ambassador Brenton.
Well, I turn to, well, I mean, here in the UK, I turn to the BBC and the Financial Times, essentially. I obviously read the Russian websites, the Russian newspapers on the web, and I also rely, I have to say, on the New York Times.
Okay. All right.
The New York Times, the Financial Times, and the BBC, those are your main sources, right?
Those are my main sources, yes.
James, what about you?
Well, obviously, the Russia Insider, Charles.
Thank you very much.
A big part of,
well, Tony's going to start reading it now.
Yes.
Yeah, I apologize for omitting that.
Well, obviously, obviously there's a reliance on the, sure, there's obviously a reliance, I think, on the part of all of us, on sort of use the mainstream media. So, obviously the Washington Post, the New York Times, foreign sources, BBC. But again, what is so problematic with a lot of the coverage in the States is that you see that you're not getting the entire story, especially when compared to,
So the reason I ask that question is because I'm in the business. What I do every day and what my publication does is I study what everybody's writing about Russia from all over the world. And all those sources that you mentioned, they're, in my opinion, and I consider myself relatively objective about this. I'm an American citizen. I really care about getting down to the truth. Those are fantastically biased and inaccurate publications that publish incredibly misleading things about Russia. And so here you have, a very senior retired diplomat getting his information from it. You, James, have a big readership in the U.S. and conservative circles about what's going on in Russia. You're not getting your information, you're not getting the correct facts, and it's actually very hard to get them these days.
We all know how the Ukrainian crisis is being covered in U.S. mainstream media. Here's the latest twist, courtesy Fox News.
The only way the United States can have any effect in this region and turn the tide is to start killing Russians by killing so many Russians that even Putin's media can't hide the fact that Russians are returning to the motherland in body bags. Disgusting.
What's worse is that many Americans think Fox is actually news. German coverage is hardly more objective. Remember these fake pictures of a so-called Russian invasion of Ukraine by ZDF? Well, this cover from Der Spiegel. And then this.
A sensational revelation today. Putin himself said that he personally planned, ordered and oversaw the annexation of Crimea, which was the first violent unilateral redrawing of a border in Europe since World War II. He said he had been planning it for a long time.
The difference here is that many Germans see through the lies. A poll by German public broadcaster NDR has found that 63% of Germans have little or no confidence in the Ukraine reporting by German media. Of these 63%, almost every third thinks their reporting might be one-sided or not objective. No wonder, given the principles which Germany's largest publishing house follows. For instance, Alex Springer SE, among its brands are Die Welt and Bild newspapers. So its media outlets have to uphold their policies, which are further unification of the peoples of Europe, supporting the vital rights of the people of Israel, and maintain solidarity with the United States of America. In other words, mainstream. They openly say they are not objective, and that's no laughing matter.
Meldung aus Odessa. Über 40 Menschen werden in ein Gewerkschaftshaus getrieben und dort verbrannt.
Das ist unsere Chance für einen Geländegewinn. Schreiben Sie pro-russischer Mob, verbrennt wehrlose Ukrainer.
Herr General?
Ja.
Die Opfer sind aus dem anderen Lager.
Verdammt, die Opfer sind keine Bürger, sondern nur Separatisten. Muss es jetzt nicht heißen, ukrainischer Mob verbrennt pro-russische Separatisten? Nein, die Blattlinie muss unbedingt gehalten werden. Schauen Sie, schreiben Sie es so an die Tagesschau. Ich sage mal, in Odessa, ja, da kamen bei Zusammenstößen zwischen pro-russischen Aktivisten und Regierungsanhängern mindestens 46 Menschen ums Leben. Irgendwie.
Sie machen sich, General von Wagner.
Ja. Joining me in the now is Charles Bausman he's an editor at Russia Insider. Charles, thanks for joining us here in our Moscow studio. Germany's NDR channel has been reporting on this trend that we're going to expand on now. They gathered some reaction from the German people. Let's take a listen.
Die deutschen Medien, sowohl die Print- wie die elektronischen, dass die im Grunde genommen ein Verstärkungsorgan, ein Propagandainstrument.
Und es praktisch bei uns keine Alternative dazu gibt. In die Leitmedien keins.
You speak German, you watch and monitor German news. Are the German media really this one-sided? How bad is it?
Anissa, it's really bad. My publication is a media criticism publication, and we look at what people are writing about Russia all over the world. And we think that the Anglo media, American and UK media, is really bad. Well, German media, I would estimate as being twice as bad, 2 times worse. I mean, it's funny. I sometimes watch German TV, and I think I'm watching like a comedy show or something, like a satire. Like people are, because they're so ridiculously over the top, lying about everything, and it's extreme. It's really extraordinary.
You think that this can't be real, essentially. Is this just about Ukraine?
No, it's about Russia in general. It's about everything connected with Russia. But there was a significant ramp up last summer when the Ukraine crisis broke out.
How do Germans express their anger apart from comments on social media? I understand that there's somewhat of an uprising happening.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's almost like the propaganda went into overdrive last summer, and they didn't factor in that Germans might say, hey, we're not going to buy this anymore. And that's exactly what's happened. There's been a small explosion of alternative websites that point out these things, that complain publicly. Their readership is growing dramatically. The readership on the main German media is going down. People are filing complaints, people are filing lawsuits. I mean, it's a widespread thing, and it's widely discussed. And German society is agitated about this.
Have they managed to change anything so far? These publications, these big broadcasters, I assume they realize that there's been a shift in public opinion. They have to see this. So are they reacting?
They're reacting a little bit in that they're sort of trying to apologize and say, well, we didn't do it right, but then the next day come out and do it again. And I think what you see happening is that they really are sort of driven by sort of very strong interests that are pushing a line. And they know that if they back off on that line, German public opinion could really, really start to shift. It's already shifting, but they're like between a rock and a hard place, okay? If they back off on the hard anti-Russian stuff and Germany starts to sort of move away from U.S. policy, it's going to be a big loss for them. So they don't know what to do, basically. They're
Isn't
stuck.
that essentially happening, though, with the Minsk agreement and Chancellor Merkel sort of, at least publicly, really pushing for some kind of peace process?
Yeah, she is reacting to a political situation at home. It was interesting because in the Western media they were saying, "Oh, isn't this wonderful? Frau Merkel is a peacemaker, and she's a wonderful person, and let's maybe give her the Nobel Peace Prize." That's not at all what came into her calculations. She was facing a political crisis at home, and she had to react to it.
So this is reaction directly to the public, you think? That's interesting.
Exactly, and I don't think it represents in any way her real desire to do something, because in the past she's been very hardline, and she tried the hardline approach, and she ran into a brick wall with German public opinion, and so now she's backpedaling.
That's very interesting. I want to talk about ZDF because they've done some sort of sketch comedy focusing specifically on the coverage of Ukraine. It doesn't fall so much in the line with the news you see on ZDF. How does that play out?
Yeah, well, you know, that's a long-standing satire show in Germany. It's very popular. Political satire is hugely popular in Germany, which also suggests that because there's a huge amount of propaganda, that the satirists have a way of sort of countering it. And the individuals, the creative people who make the show, are part of this 63% you mentioned that just think this is ridiculous and don't believe it anymore. And so they start putting on these aggressive shows, criticizing the government and ridiculing the media. And at one point, one of the major guys who they just accused of lying flat out and being connected with all these Washington think tanks and sort of probably in the pay of Washington, he's a senior editor of one of the biggest German publications, he took them to court and said, look, take that off the air, that's defamation, I don't want it there, it's embarrassing to me. He lost the case. You know?
So the show, which is outsourced onto ZDF, basically won the right to keep making fun of this propaganda. I want to talk a little bit about what we can do to balance the propaganda in the world. Certainly Germans are hungry for the other side of the story. What if we broaden it to like a global trend that's happening? Are people wanting to have sources where they can hear both sides?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you see that, you know, our site is a good example of that. It's just gotten a huge response. It was actually rather unexpected for us. And it showed that there's a real hunger out there. There's really like a need for another point of view. And people are getting this very narrow, tendentious point of view that's pro-government in Europe and the US. And people are realizing that it doesn't add up and it's not working. And I would say that the funny thing is that Germany is way out in front of people on this. They're really, really way, you know, just not putting up with it anymore because they got it hit the hardest with it over the last year.
Well, speaking of that hunger, Charles Bausman and Russia Insider have launched a crowdfunding campaign because they've launched this independent website, which is aiming to do just this. Have a look.
We challenged the corporate media, and we became one of the biggest news resources about Russia. We're totally transparent. You can find all the information on our website. We're not connected to any governments or institutions. We paid for this out of our own pockets.
We want to hire journalists to dig deeper, to study the ties between media and the defense industries and the governments, to go beyond Russia, to write about NSA leaks, U.S. foreign policy in general.
The purpose of this Kickstarter campaign truly is to have the financial resources to identify the lies in the corporate media, deconstruct it, and destroy it.
Russia Insider Kickstarter has launched. It's on its third day. It seems to be doing pretty well. Why should people donate, Charles?
You know, because this is really an opportunity to get the truth out. It's a totally independent organization. We're not connected with any governments, any institutions, think tanks, universities, nothing. These are just volunteers all over the world. It's user-generated content. It's people speaking up who care about things. We try to provide a diversity of opinion. We try to criticize propaganda, not just in the Western media, but point it out anywhere where it's happening and say, look, this just isn't true. And there's a real response from citizens. They want this, you know, and so our numbers are booming. It's really, really interesting.
You already have been noticed by BuzzFeed, which is always a good sign.
Yeah.
It seems that they're finding it hard to believe, and I assume many of their Western counterparts, that you're not some kind of government-funded project. How could people want to get the truth out there just because?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, we're getting a lot of that, and that's a very, very strong reaction in my home country, in the United States. But, you know, once you talk to people and you explain what's going on and how it's happened, they come around pretty quickly. They realize that, hey, something's going on. So we're having a big effect. We're making a big difference.
They can always go and check the facts. I understand everything's transparent on Russia Insider. Charles Bausman, editor of Russia Insider. Do check out his Kickstarter campaign. Thanks so much for being in the Now.
Thank you, Anissa.